Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner of Key Solutions and the host of this show. It's no secret that the Department of Homeland Security is one of the most dynamic agencies in the government contracting industry. And within DHS, Customs and Border Protection represents an enormous and vital component. Yet many contractors struggle with how to best work within the CPB and other DHS components and acquisition structure. Joining me today to help clarify these issues are three highly regarded government procurement and acquisition leaders. First, I'd like to welcome back to Government Contracting Weekly Mark Borkowski, the Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Technology and Innovation, the U.S. Customs Border Protection. Good morning, Mark, and welcome back, sir. Welcome. Good to see you again. Next, I want to welcome Richard Gunderson, the Executive Director and Head of the Contracting Activity of the Procurement Directorate for the CBP. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show. And last but not least, Charlie Armstrong, who's the Assistant Commissioner and Chief Information Officer of the Office of Information and Technology for CBP. Good morning to you, Charlie.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Okay. All right, panel, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get right to it. So the first question I'd like to ask probably it would be the question of DHS, the structure, the acquisition personnel. To the outside, it looks like a labyrinth of a lot of people, a lot of different things. How does all that work?
Well, I think to the outside it probably does look like that. What you have here from Customs and Border Protection are three of the principal executives who participate in making key acquisition decisions. And those duties are divided for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is this is a very arcane and complex business, and it requires a little bit of expertise that's sort of specialized. And the other is that we need a little bit of checks and balances on each other. You know, Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Gunderson do a pretty good job, I think, trying to check me sometimes.
Keep you under control? Is that
They
right?
try.
Yeah.
They try, and they can give you their own impressions of whether they're successful or not. So the government operates that way, and I do think my experience has been it has been confusing to industry to understand who do I talk to, when do I talk to them, how do they interact, and so yes, we recognize that it seems a bit.
So it's not an accident. There's a reason for having the different personnel because it's a check and balance or creative kind of tension. Is that part of that?
I mean, okay. I think that.
Yeah.
You know, Rick and I are fortunate enough that we actually got to work up at the departmental headquarters. And in the early days of Homeland Security, we were accused of not having a lot of structure. And so I think that the structure that you see today is kind of the outcome of many years of trying to develop structure that helps us manage across the board acquisitions of IT, non-IT, and bring those together in a good, cohesive.
So it's evolved over time.
Yes, disciplined structure.
Okay, here's a question, Rick. I'm going to ask you this question first. Let's assume for a minute that I am Jim McCarthy. I'm the head of a new small business, and I believe that I have a really neat new widget that DHS would benefit by, but I have no idea what to do and how to proceed. Can you walk me through the process of how it would be optimally that I could begin doing business with the DHS?
Sure. A good entry point at CBP as well as the other components at DHS would be either the industry liaison or the small business specialist. So depending on the size of your firm, you say you're a small business, you could come to either of those folks at CBP. They both reside in my office. These individuals can meet with companies they do on a regular basis. They want to listen to the company, hear about their capabilities, talk about what it's like to do business with CBP and DHS. Once they learn about the company's capabilities, then they can do an assessment and maybe determine what customer within CBP might be best appropriate. Or it might be saying, well, you might want to talk to ICE or FEMA based on what your service or product is. Once we do that, we can arrange meetings with an office such as in Mark's or with Charlie's to meet with the program personnel to further explore what the capabilities are and how they match up with our mission and our needs.
My feeling might be that you are hounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of different vendors and would-be contractors and subcontractors. So how do I rise above the fray, if you will, to stand out so that you'll take a personal interest in my new widget, right?
And You know, Mr. Gunderson talks about these entities that exist, and they're pretty much consistent across the government. But I think it's also important, particularly with respect to your question, to understand that there are personalities involved here. And one of the things I think vendors have to do is kind of understand who those other personalities are and try to figure out which one is most likely to resonate with what they're saying. Mm-hmm. So there's the business aspect of this. How do you do business with the government? But there's also the how interested are you in my technology, or how interested are you in my service? That's where somebody like Mr. Armstrong, Charlie, might be able to be very helpful because he handles things like information technology. Or I might be able to be very helpful because I'll talk about what kind of technology we're interested in surveilling the border, for example. And I think one of the messages that we'd like to get out is that industry needs to kind of understand that there are those personalities. It can be very personality dependent in how that works the way you're describing.
Right. So how do I rise to the top of the pile so that you would be personally interested in my widget then? I mean, what do you expect or want to hear from a contractor that would resonate and say, yep, I want to talk to this person?
Well, first of all, within my organization, I try to have the entry point be my Chief Technology Officer, Wolf Tomby. So, you know, I ask most people that want to come in and pitch their widget to start with Wolf, because Wolf's the guy that kind of keeps the glue together on how does the architecture all fit together, how does it work together, and making sure that we don't duplicate, triplicate things within the enterprise. If you want to talk to me, I'm more interested in talking about the strategic direction, where we're headed with cloud computing, the explosion of data, how we manage data across the network, security across the enterprise. I mean, those are the big kind of issues from my perspective, and controlling cost. So I think the delineation for me is if you want to sell a widget, then really start with Wolf, and then he can help you get in touch with the right program people that are really interested in that particular product.
Okay, so let's imagine that I got through to Wolf, and what would he want to hear that would make it beneficial for the department? In other words, do you want me just to come in with a PowerPoint presentation and you know, slog through it for 30 minutes, or is there something else that would likely trigger a better response?
You know, when I'm in town, I have at least one of these meetings a day. And when I have these discussions, and that's a very common discussion, what we tell the vendors is, okay, we've heard 20, 30 people that are like you. So what I'm really interested in is, what do you consider to be your discriminators? What do you understand about your competition? What do you think, have you thought about how I might use your system to advance my capability to do mission? Some vendors want to come in and say, well, I'm not sure about that. Would you give me some insight so I can come back? If that's what the vendor is here for, I'm very interested in that, but we need to know that right away.
You need to know that the purpose of the meeting, essentially.
Is that, right? In which case, I'm less interested in the marketing of a solution than I am in having a discussion about, you know, what might we need, what could you do for us?
Well, are there any boundaries on what constitutes a permissible discussion in one of these meetings? I mean, is there some things that you can't talk about, that I shouldn't talk about, or anything like that?
Well, it's obviously important to all firms that there's fairness and there's not information that's being shared that's going to give one company an advantage over another. So we try to encourage communications with industries, even in the planning process, and throughout the solicitation process and up to award. So I think we might get to a point where we're just about a short time away from issuing a solicitation, and we might then start to, I'll say, embargo certain conversations. And
that's a good stopping point, because we're going to stop for a message here. But when we come back, I would like to talk about the selection process when you're about to send out that RFP. We'll be right back.
So did we win that government contract?
We did.
And?
And now we've got to deal with the regulatory hurdles.
Well, good luck with that.
When the government's your client, you need to play by their rules.
Ah, and the rules change more than you'd think.
Exactly. We need someone who's done this before.
Plus, it's complicated, so we're going with BDO.
BDO?
People who know government contracting know BDO.
Today, I think people have a lot of opportunity for training, but what they still need is that opportunity to interact with other people who are in the profession, who have done the job, who know how things really work, know what works and what doesn't, that sort of thing. And you really need that, and that's where NCMA, I think, excels.
Join 800 government and industry contracting professionals for riveting keynotes, executive panel discussions, and 25 educational sessions from leaders in the field.
Welcome back. We want to talk to you now about the source selection process. And I'm going to ask you this question, no offense intended to any one of you, but how does it really work?
Well, I group them into two categories. The low price technically acceptable, which has been getting a lot of talk in the industry that there's an overuse of it by the government. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's used appropriately when you're buying commercial, non-complex items, and it makes sense. But I think the more important one is when we actually are doing a best value trade-off
so
analysis.
So let's talk about that. How does it really work?
So typically what you're going to see is multiple evaluation teams. There'll be a technical evaluation team, a management evaluation team, a cost evaluation team, maybe a past performance evaluation team. Each of these teams are going to have leaders and have a cross-cut of personnel from across the organization. We try to bring the operator in. It's very important that we're buying things for the mission, that we have their input. These teams are going to spend the time reviewing the proposals.
Can these teams talk to each other during this process, or do they talk to each other?
There's an interaction.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't like to definitely share all the cost information with some of the technical teams. We want them to be focused on that, but there is a dialogue between the groups. These groups will do their evaluations, and they're going to feed their information up sometimes to a source selection advisory council. That'd be a more formal source selection for the large complex. Ultimately, you have a source selection authority, source selection official. That person is the one who's empowered to make that decision. They're going to take all the information that's been presented to them from the different organizations, and they're either going to maybe accept a recommendation to make an award, or they could go their own way and use that information and make a decision that they feel is different, but they have a basis for that.
Does that happen very often, by the way, where the selection official makes an independent, a different decision?
It's not unusual.
Yeah.
It has to be rationalized.
Yeah.
Usually, the way we run these things, the source selection authority is engaged with the team. So by the time we get to the final decision, they're fairly well reconciled. It's not unusual for a source selection authority to go in and say, well, I sort of agree with some of what you did, I don't agree with some of what you did, put that together into a package and make a decision based on that. I think it's also important to understand that the source selection authority who's making this decision is the one who's saying, I think this performance offered is or is not worth this additional cost. I found that industry is looking for the algorithm. They're wondering, how do I crank this through one of Mr. Armstrong's computers and spit out the answer? And it does not work that way.
Yeah.
It's somebody's subjective but experienced and competent judgment. It's like buying a car. Do I buy the Ford Fiesta or do I buy the luxury car? And it comes down to whether or not I think the difference in cost is worth it. That's how we make a source selection.
I understand. Does the evaluation team, do they rank, do they score, do they recommend, do they just list the strengths and the weaknesses?
Right.
How does it get to the next level?
All the above of what you just described.
So it's situationally dependent then?
I mean, the teams, they are going to be, it's their job to identify the strengths and the weaknesses, deficiencies, and they are going to assign ratings to these proposals. In the first part of it, while we try to reserve the right to award based on initial proposals, a lot of times we will take the findings that we have from the initial evaluation and then go have discussions with our vendors and try to resolve those issues. So it's important that we have all that well documented.
Can I ask you this? What makes a one proposal better than the other? In other words, how does one make it through the competitive gate, if you will, and others are discarded early in the process? What does the decision turn on, if you will help me on that?
You're talking about what we call a competitive range determination, which is an optional part of the process. And it's a process that's made by Mr. Gunderson or one of his contracting officers. The actual technical definition is a selection of the highest rated. So again, as you described, our technical evaluation teams are not going to compare proposals. They're going to say there's a standard to be good, there's a standard to be satisfactory, there's a standard to be marginal. They're going to evaluate each proposal independently against those standards, and they're going to report, this one was marginal, this one was good, this one was outstanding. They're generally going to then put those in some kind of an ordinal ranking. And then we're going to make the discussion about, in that 1 through N ranking, is it worth taking all of them through the whole process, or does it make sense to draw a line and drop some out? A lot of times that's made based on our assessment of how likely is it that these ones below the line really have a chance to win. We don't want to drag bidders through a process that they have really very little chance of success. It's not in their interest, it's not in our interest. But technically it's the highest ranked proposals, and that's how we make that decision. Right?
Charlie, your thoughts?
I'd add in there that, you know, one of the things that we see often is, and I'm not saying the government does a perfect job of this, but the quality control around the proposal that comes in is really key. And it's amazing how many times after the fact that offers come in for debriefings and ask us specific questions about their proposal, and then we tell them our interpretation of what they wrote, and then they realize that's not what they were trying to convey. So kind of having that maybe third-party review of their proposals before it comes into us, to ensure that we're going to read it the same way that they intend for us to read it.
So it gets to the quality control.
It really is.
Rick, what does a winning proposal look like in your opinion?
I would say three things come to mind. First off, is it responsive to our solicitation? Our solicitation is to provide instructions. You need to respond to where we say.
So it has to be responsive, right?
Number two, communicate that demonstrate that you understand what our requirement is. And three, demonstrate that you have the ability to perform that. And what I mean by that is just don't parrot back our requirements. Right. That's what we see oftentimes.
That's a red flag.
And that's hard to work with.
Now, when you get into the...
Well, we'll continue this discussion right after this word from our sponsors. It's no surprise to any of you that social media has impacted virtually every aspect of our personal lives. Sure, you can say there are both pluses and minuses, but this is the world we live in, and absent a move to a deserted island, there's no getting around it. What is surprising, though, is how some in the government contracting community have not yet fully embraced social media as a business strategy, not only to advance your brand, but also to help win and retain business with your federal customers. At Key Solutions, we believe that social media has to be an integral part of your business development plan. We also believe that while this technology is advancing like a high-speed train, you can either jump on board or watch your competition leave you in the dust. If you are a federal contractor looking to integrate a social media strategy into your business, we will be able to help you. Contact us at aockeysolutions.com. It's been said, at least on the industry side of the desk, that compliance is king. That you could score, in theory, 75, 80% of the available points if the evaluators can just find what they're supposed to find. That's not enough to win, but it could be enough to lose. Is that true?
Yes, I think there's a very binary determination, and I think Rick covered that very well, that you either did or didn't meet the minimums of the requirement. And then to win, of course, is did you exceed those minimums, and did you exceed them in a way and at a cost that it's worth going beyond those minimums? So I think it's very true, but it's binary. You pass, fail, then if you pass, you win or you don't win. That's the next question, I think, that bidders are interested in.
So and chances are if it's not compliant, it won't even make it all the way down the track anyway.
Right. Contracting officer will throw it out.
Throw it out. Okay, so part of our job then would seem to be is to make sure that we give you no grounds to throw it out. In other words, be compliant.
Right.
Right?
Yes, but again, I think there's a misperception that now you're going to win.
No, right.
There's a lot more to it than that, and it gets into, again, this subjective determination a source selection authority is going to make about, did what you offered me, particularly when you're comparing performance and cost, was it worth the cost? And normally the way you show that to me is that you understand how I can use your proposal to do a better job in my mission. And you know, Mr. Armstrong, you probably have some views on that.
So, you know, a lot of what my organization buys is services. I know we're a big technology shop and we buy a lot of IT equipment, but the majority of it is services. And what we see all too often is that companies are a little bit skeptical about asking questions, or maybe they don't ask questions up front during the comment period or question phase of the whole proposal process. And the feedback that we've that we've received is that, well, I didn't want to ask the question because I didn't want all the other
bidders to know
what my questions were. However, oftentimes those questions would help them get to the root of what we're trying to, the problem we're trying to solve, and or especially with respect to the cost model, understanding the cost model, because quite often we see a company writes a great technical proposal, but they totally screw up the cost model.
I could see how that could happen. Here's a question for any or all of you, which is, are we to believe that the government would throw out a otherwise superior proposal with a great technical approach because there were some minor non-compliance issues? Does that even make sense?
It makes sense. We would say not for minor non-compliance.
Not for minor.
But the question is, what's minor?
Yeah.
If it is other than minor, we have no choice but to throw it out. If we were to have a protest on an unsuccessful bidder that we awarded to someone who had a non-compliance, we will almost certainly lose that protest. So in some cases, bidders do that to themselves. We spend a lot of time on those questions, all of us, where we say, is this a significant material non-compliance? Because if it is, we don't have a choice.
You can't ask a question or a clarification question?
If we decide, and Mr. Gunderson, that's probably a better question.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, again, are there other proposals that you could award to based on that initial evaluation? Then you would maybe go down that road. But if you are going to open up discussions with the vendors, then that would be something that you could address with them.
Okay. Industry says or thinks that somehow the evaluators are looking for reasons to award it to them. And I often say, no, they're actually looking for reasons to throw you out. Which is closer to the real truth?
My experience has been we hate to throw anybody out. We like to have lots of competition. I like to have hard decisions. So I'm not looking to throw anybody out, and I'm not looking to award to anybody in particular. When I read a proposal, to be perfectly frank, I can't tell you who wrote it. I'm looking at the details of the proposal. What I'm trying to do is characterize what exactly am I getting from this proposal, what exactly is the cost, what's the difference between it and other proposals, and are those worth the cost? That's all I'm trying to do.
Okay. Well, it may be that if it's so flawed, it has to be thrown out, as you said.
Right.
But okay, here's another thought. It's been rumored or thought on the industry side that when the proposals come in, they bust the books up and they split them into various evaluators, and that no one person reads the entire proposal. True or false? At least within DHS and CBP. True or false?
Largely true. Largely true. There are some cases where specific individuals, one or two individuals, may try to read the entire proposal, but we do divvy them up, and then those are summarized for the source selection authority. When I've been a source selection authority, based on those summaries, I'll go and look at things that I think I need to look at. But it's largely true that probably no one has read the whole thing.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to step away again, and when we come back, we'll continue.
AFCEA has been bringing government and industry together since 1946. By joining AFCEA, you'll reach the decision makers and become part of the discussion. You'll increase market visibility, gain market insight, receive discounts on AFCEA member services and events, and manage and engage corporate associates. AFCEA is the association of choice. Join today at www.afcea.org.
Question for you. Do you lack an overall effective win strategy? Hi, I'm Jim McCarthy, owner of Key Solutions. For over 30 years, KSI has helped clients win or retain over $130 billion in government contracts by providing the keys to winning. Now, if you're chasing a must-win contract, visit aockeysolutions.com and click on Contact Us. It's a tough market. Don't go it alone.
Since 1941, the USO has been lifting the spirits of America's troops and their families. Members of our military continue to make sacrifices and defend our nation. That's why the USO of Metropolitan Washington, Baltimore is committed to serving them throughout their years of service. USO Metro is the way for you to say thanks to our local military members, their families, and our wounded warriors and caregivers. Please visit us at usometro.org.
Welcome back. Here's an opportunity for all three of you to leave your final message, your one takeaway that you hope the audience gets. Charlie, what would it be? What would yours be?
So I do meet with companies, and I think it's very important for them to at least have some understanding of what are my problems.
Yeah.
So know that coming into the room. They may not know it to the nth degree, but at least have some idea of what you want to talk to me about with respect to a
Sounds like do their homework.
Exactly.
That's perfect. Rick, what would be your one takeaway?
CBP has a very diverse acquisition portfolio. We spend over $2.5 billion a year on products and services, and each year we do business with new companies in the hundreds. So if you haven't done business with CBP, don't be discouraged about that. Continue to talk to us, and the opportunities are there.
So you're still looking for new companies to be contracted? Okay, that's good. Mark, your final takeaway.
Mine would be understand that this is not rocket science, and it's not deterministic, it's not an algorithm, it's not a crank. So if I were industry trying to do business with CBP, I'd do some business intelligence on the people who are going to make the decisions for me, because it is going to be somewhat a subjective determination, and you need to understand that going in.
I understand. Okay. What about if we don't know who the decision makers are going to be? How do we do research in that case?
I think you talk to the people who are advertised as the program manager, the contracting officer, you get some sense from them, and as Charlie said, you ask some questions. And I think that's how you get some insight into who's likely to make that decision.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay, well, there are countless opportunities to advance your business within the government contracting community, but it's extremely difficult to succeed without a clear roadmap of how to best proceed and navigate through enormous organizations like the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, helping contractors find the most effective path to winning is the mission of my own company, Key Solutions. I want to thank our panelists for joining me today, starting with Charlie Armstrong, the Assistant Commissioner and Chief Information Officer of the Office of Information Technology for CBP. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it very much. Next, Richard Gunderson, the Executive Director and Head of Contracting Activity from the Procurement Directorate for CBP. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate you being here very much. And last but not least, Mark Borkowski, the Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Technology and Innovation and Acquisition for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Mark, thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
But most importantly, I want to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. Now, on behalf of all my colleagues at Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy, and I'll see you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.